Herr Schultz, Garry Schultz. I've known Garry now for, I knew his mom actually for 41 years. Known Garry for almost as long. Was actually there when Garry and Christine were married. And so Christine is always Mrs. Schultz to me. And out of respect, then Garry is Herr Schultz. But I've known them for a while. So Garry has been behind the microphone for decades and been extremely inventive and creative. And whatever technology I've learned from him. I've learned from Larry. And we have made slow but steady progress in that department for the last the last 20 years together. So today it's my pleasure to invite Garry to step in front of the microphone and speak for a little while. And so we're going to split the time, he and I, and whatever he doesn't use, I get to use a little bit later. So first of all, I have to ask him to unmute. And then secondly, I have to give him the opportunity to speak, which makes him a what is called a co-host in Zoom. So he is now a co-host. He has to invite himself to unmute, and I see Garry on my screen. He's got that puzzled look. Can you actually hear me, Garry?
Yeah, I'm getting there. This will stop others screen sharing. Do you want to continue? So I guess I do.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So now you're officially in front of the microphone. You know how I feel. You officially have control of the meeting. You really know how I feel. Don't enjoy it for too long because I'm getting it back sometime soon. But he did give me the title of his brief message, and he started sharing his screen. Our heroes circles. I reported as a heroes circle or heroes apostrophe circle. Maybe I didn't spell it correctly. Anyway, yours. Okay,
I'm not I'm not
the
sure if I got it right
plural of
either.
heroes is that. Okay, I shall now officially mute myself for a few minutes, and I shall listen to what you have to say. So let me just I'll mute you. You carry on, okay?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope the snow outside isn't an omen on what's going to happen here, but it was kind of almost disappointed to see where it dumped last night. But anyway, in the last few weeks and last month, I came across a few things about how our journeys through life take us. It was a store. It was some talks and some information about a hero, and I thought I'd try and recreate it in a way and bring it to you for a short talk this morning. And so here we go. Heroes are a fundamental part of our lives. They are everywhere, and they have been all through history. Different cultures, different religions, different time periods. It doesn't matter. They are there. And they not only define individuals, they actually define nations. As we pass through this spring season, we also pass through its festivals. And for Christians, it's a simple connection to make. The story of Christ is a fundamental centerpiece, the fundamental hero story, as it should be. It defines our whole life. It makes us aware of the frailty of our temporary existence in this universe. And that we also recognize that God has set a life of challenges for us. That is also fundamental. We are not sent to this planet for a luxury holiday. Our goal in life is not to wall up for ourselves a life with no goals and no achievements. The balance of nature is to maintain by the struggle. Wolves eat caribou, deer, and other animals. So do bears, so do lions. And we go on TV and we can watch lots of documentaries about this. It can be kind of hard sometimes to watch wolves or lions take down a defenseless animal and consume it, especially if it's a young animal. But we recognize that it maintains the balance of nature, and that's just the way it is down here. In this introduction, I wanted to try and show a short video of an animal encounter. I wish I could show it all, but I have to be careful copyright, so I'll try and mess with it a bit. But it's over 15 years old, and it was posted on YouTube by some visitors to a game reserve in Africa. And you've probably seen it before because it's been quite popular. I've watched it a few times over the years, but it's only a few minutes long. And here I'll try and get it started. So let's just see if I can do this. Okay, there you can see there's some lions are sitting over here in one part, and you can see over here some Cape buffalo are coming up. Not really aware of it, but they're part of a herd. But there's some stragglers here in the beginning, and they're heading for the watering hole after some time of grazing. And it starts with these animals at the front who are a little bit more unprotected. And we notice that we've already seen the young lions are waiting to see if they can take advantage of some opportunity. And in the course of time, as they get closer, the buffalo meets the lion, and the buffalo makes a challenge here in a minute, but he'll make a quick retreat, as we would assume. And as they expected, the lions will begin their attack, and a target will be selected. See, there he is. He's throwing his head at the lions. He says, "You guys get out of here." And he thinks, there he goes. And as usual in these circumstances, it's the weak or the sick or the young that take it. And in this case, these lions managed to grab that calf, and they're hanging on. And the story of nature begins here. At the edge of the watering hole, these lions hold on, and they begin to choke the young animal to finish it off. And it's their nature, their technique, and they're actually quite calm about it. They've got it under control, at least for the moment. But that's not the end of this particular story. So in a moment here, they start to realize they need to take it out. But there's also another part to this story. As we watch, yep, there it comes. A pair of alligators show up on this particular story. And these alligators decide, well, they're these crocodiles, sorry, they decide that they want a piece of this action. They think that that food is just something for them. And a struggle begins. Those lions are dragging so hard on that calf that they almost pull the alligator right out of the water, and they give up. So they get it back again. They get things under control, and they go back to their job. They're quite calm about it again. They've got everything going. But now, if we've been watching all this, you think, wow, what a way to die for a calf. What a struggle he has. But this story isn't over. And because of the bravery of the number of the herd, you'll see that they begin to try and rescue the young calf. Look at that. There they go one. And they're managing to they're managing to break it up. And now we can see the calf starting to stand up. There he is. He's standing up, and he's let go, and he's back in the herd. And now through the rest of the story here, you'll see that these these buffaloes scatter these lions. And anyway, that's quite a story. If you can watch it. You can go to YouTube and look for something called Battle at Kruger if you want to see it, or if you've seen it before and forgot, and watch it again. It's a kind of a nice little piece of video. It's actually ended up being shown on shows like National Geographic and Animal Planet, just to name a couple. It can be a fun video to watch. It's a type of a hero story, even though it's only a few minutes long. It brings together the elements and the drama of a hero's existence, starting with the calf leaving the safety and protection of the herd. He ends up facing the enemy who overpower him, which brings him into his near-death experience, being dragged through one disaster after another. Then comes the crazy rescue and the recovery and the redemption, and finally the return to safety. He ends up back in the protection of the herd, but he's not the same calf. It would be quite reasonable to think that it will be some time before he does this trick again. It's a bit easy to identify with this story. This calf fell into a kind of hell and came back. He beat the odds. It's a satisfying watch to see fate open an unusual door. This is an example of a hero story in nature, and in it we end up seeing the raw workings of nature that strives for the middle ground, for the balance, and in the meantime, how it can make heroes in unlikely situations. It also shows that the difficulties, the tragedies, the struggles bring along an overall balance in the value of life. It also helps a bit to show how we should evaluate our own struggles in life, and that we do learn lessons. And through the remainder of this morning, I want to touch on this part of our lives, how heroes is a fundamental part of our life and our psyche, and why we appreciate them. And then in their stories can be related to us in the form of a circle, hopefully from some different angle than we've ever heard of this before. I have already mentioned the great story of how God himself came and lived the life of man as an example, but the Bible has many, many other stories, and it's not just the Bible. As already mentioned, heroes are part of history of mankind, all religions, countries, and people. It is so fundamentally wired into us to admire what others have done that we can do today through the easy access of technology. There are thousands upon thousands of movies on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Crave TV, etc. There are movie channels, movie theaters, Blu-ray discs, and DVDs and books. And we have all our favorites. Maybe it's an old show like Alice in Wonderland, or perhaps maybe even older from authors of Shakespeare. Maybe it's old Westerns or old classics, or maybe new modern shows. I've always liked The Princess Bride, The Hunt for Red October, and The Matrix, just to name a few. We all have our favorites that we can watch more than once. It's what we do. We identify with heroes and in different kinds of journeys. Why? Because we're all aware that what this life is about, its ups and its downs. There are times we can enjoy achievements and our accomplishments that are often hard won, and there are other times we struggle through trials. It's the meat of our existence. And so we enjoy the stories of others who have beat the odds too. It encourages us, it strengthens us. But going back to what I mentioned, heroes is not just a personal thing. It even plays its part in the formation of nations, its beliefs and purpose. What makes Canada great? What makes the US great? You know what they are. Part of it can be attributed to great political leaders, even founding fathers who helped lay the foundations, but there's also others like great generals or even great thinkers who we may almost forget about, but who have played a large role in giving a country its vision. Great authors. We can easily recognize the name of an author like Mark Twain, but there are more. So there we see in a small way how threaded into our lives a hero's story is. It's respected and appreciated. So in recognizing this very basic human attribute of the prevalence of heroes in every part of this world in our lives, our next focus is how do we define it? What is the pattern? What are the characteristics? Sure, there must be some kind of consistency, something that will help explain this phenomena, something that will give us an insight into dynamics and construction of this conquering protagonist. Well, when men try to diagram a hero's story, it is very often illustrated as a circle. Starting at the top, our hero receives some kind of a calling which takes him away from the normal path in life and down the road in this circle, which is often a place he has never been into, an unfamiliar territory. Usually, he also meets allies and helpers and foes. As he gets into the meat of the issue, he begins to reach down to the bottom of the circle. Here's where our hero must summon all his strength to battle the enemy and somehow conquer it before he begins to return up the other side or to where he was before, to finish a battle triumphant and return the hero. When we think of that buffalo calf, how he accidentally started his circle journey by being out there a little too far away from the safety of their herd, we can see the path of adventure. The other animals he was with were safer because they were full grown and far better chance of making it back to the herd for protection, but he was too young to be where he was. As he came to the bottom of the circle, he was tackled into the water by the lion. Here, where we can get into the life and death struggle, not only fighting lions, but also crocodiles. But his destiny to live through this, but it is his destiny to live through this day. So he rescues, his rescue comes from the herd who hears his cries and come and rescue him. He then returns to the former life back to the top of the circle, but he's not the same. He learned a few things and honed his survival skills. He got some more education. He got a lot smarter. He has come back to where he was in the safety of the herd, but mentally he has changed. He is not the same calf. And so it is with the basic hero story, and so it is with us. We face these kind of stories over and over again in our lives. We start by a calling of sorts in one form or another. Maybe it's leaving our parents' home to start a new direction life. Maybe it's to leave one job for another that has better pay. As our journey gets harder, we face this greater difficulties. Maybe it's cramming for that last final test time at college. Maybe it's a struggle to learn how to do a new job. As we get to the bottom, the real pain and struggle comes into play. Here it can get very hard. This is where we can have a death and rebirth type of experience, such as a severe health issue or car accident. But as we clear the bottom and start coming around the other side, the redemption part of the circle begins, taking us back up to the midpoint. Here we are probably gaining new strength, shredding some of our old ways, habits, and ideas. Then we cross the midpoint on our way back to the top where we return back to normal, maybe even to our normal familiar place in life. But we are not the same. Just like that calf, we learned something. We overcame something. We now have a new skill or more knowledge, more understanding, maybe more confidence, things that other people might not even notice. That the part that puts us into our journey can be many things. It's depicted as a calling, but is very often more of a push brought on by difficult times. Great difficulty can be a force that pushes us out of onto our new path, the seeking of answers to our difficulty. It could be a calling to a change. That's often what it takes. If we don't have problems, there's no reason to change. It is nature for us to want to stay in our comfort zone, the place where we know how things work. It's normal for us to avoid the harder changes. This calling could also be something bad. For a country, it could be a major war, maybe even on our own soil. It forces us and neighbors to relocate. That story has not happened here in our part of the world, but it's been going on continuously for the last many years somewhere on this planet. And it's a common circumstance for thousands of years. But it can be other things. In our personal life, it could be the need for moving from one part of the country to another, possibly losing a good job, being forced to seek something else, maybe re-educate, maybe a car accident. As a country, it could be an economic crisis or maybe a call to war or a bad period of government and leadership. Whatever it is, It's a force that takes us down a circle where we go down uncharted territory, something to make us start again. The Bible talks of those who receive a calling. King David, who had developed a skill as a shepherd to protect the herd, was called to defend the entire nation of Israel using the skills he had developed. But this new challenge that the armies of Israel had drawn him into was a new, unfamiliar territory. When he came down that circle to the bottom where he faced off in the valley with Goliath, do you think he was nervous? A bit worried at times? Of course he was. You can bet he experienced some periods of concern. It was a near death experience. It was not a guaranteed win, but he did have some well practiced skills that he could use, and it did carry him through to win. And even in this circumstance, an unusual place, that he had the encouragement of the armies of Israel behind him. And when he came up the other side of the circle after his success, he was a hero of a nation. Then there's a story of Queen Esther. She was someone who had a natural gift of beauty and talent and who was privileged to join the king of Persia's inner circle. The quest in her hero circle came when she was called on in a time of crisis to protect the children of Israel. Was she scared? Absolutely. She was so scared that she called on her national family to fast and pray for her for 3 days. And what happened? She became a hero. She also presents a facet of the hero struggle that is quite common, the hesitation, not wanting to go forward. It's also something we face in different circles we go through. We can end up facing something we don't want any part of, not wanting to train for the new career, not wanting to move to another location, another part of the world, not wanting to learn something new that's hard to learn. And then there's a story of Job, who lost almost everything. He lost family, friends, wealth. It just didn't end for him. The bottom of the circle was a bitter place. We can witness Job's mind at the time. And I'll just bring up a slide here for you. Man born of a woman is of a few days and full of trouble. He springs up like a flower and withers away like a fleeting shadow. He does not endure. Do not fix your eyes on such a one. Will you bring him before you for judgment? Who can bring what is pure from impure? No one. Man's days are determined. You have decreed the number of his months and have set the limits he cannot exceed. So look away from him and let him alone till he has been put in the time of like a hired man. At least there's hope for a tree. If it's cut down, it will sprout again, and its new shoots will not fail. Its roots may grow old in the ground and the stump die in the soil, yet at the scent of the water it will bud and put forth shoots like a plant. But man dies and is laid low. He breathes his last and he is no more. His water disappears from the sea, or a riverbed becomes parched and dry. So man lies down and does not rise up till the heavens are no more. Men will not awake, be roused from their sleep. Here we see the defeat part of the circle. It's bad at the bottom. We see the utter defeat that Job felt. He feels like death and it's hard, but it ends. And following that crash, there's a rebirth experience, the redemption, the return. These are slow and painful steps, but we realize you're alive, that you have gained something for your trouble. The journey to recovery can be just as long and arduous as a journey to the depths. The whole thing is quite an ordeal, but we are gaining something. We're expanding our potentials. As we realize we're still alive and we begin to return to the game, to the action, to the battlefield of our life, we get back to our work. But we are not the same. We may look the same, wear the same clothes, have the same name, but we are not the same person. Others may not notice any change, and it may be even subtle, some increased confidence, maybe hope or vision to now see the project is worth doing. We are now better at it. We may look back and say, couldn't I have done this without all the ordeal, as Job probably thought? Well, probably not. It sometimes just takes a lot to break through the past and its limitations into a greater potential. At times, there's just no other way to change. Change is an insulting, grueling experience. But if we want to maximize our potentials, there's no other thing to do. And what have we gained? In mythological hero stories, we have gained is often depicted as a sword. That sword represents a new kind of effectiveness for our journey ahead. You are now stronger for your trouble. You are gaining new strength. You have cut away some of the chaff and are more effective at cutting away some of the debris in front of you. Job experienced this. He continues on, he makes it through and comes out the other side, comes back to himself, regains more wealth, gains family and friends, and he learns new things, including the fact that we can suffer greatly even if we haven't sinned. That's how these circles are. Some are hard, difficult lessons that we learned. Job learned a lot, others are easier. We go through many of these circles in our travels. We have many examples of this too in Scripture. Because of the amount of scriptures dedicated to the life of David, we can analyze a couple more of them. Going back to the story of David and Goliath, we see how our hero coming home to a hero's welcome. All Israel learned who he was and enjoyed it. But being young, he didn't quite take control of it properly. He never should have allowed people to compare him above the king, because that's what happened. The people of Israel singing, Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. David didn't really defend Saul properly and correct the crowds. He never expressed concern to Saul. What Israel was doing was not right. Instead, it seems he enjoyed the limelight without fully realizing what it was doing. That sometimes is also how we end up in the wrong place, being innocent, naive, which basically translates into being ignorant, really. That's what put David in another journey through a longer cycle, again, took him away from peace and safety and even from a privileged position to being an outcast of Israel, ending up in the worst position that he had ever been in life, living with lawbreakers and other outcasts. He endured the situation for quite some time. In fact, David was at the bottom of this circle for years, dealing with the consequences of Saul's jealousy and fear until Saul's life ended in a battle with some Philistines. David suffered greatly for not recognizing the effect of his victory against Goliath. He didn't pay attention to the jealousy that others have experienced over his fame and success. He let the fame go to his head. That's what took him down and to probably what was the worst period of his life. This typifies another such common mistake that people make while going through circles. It happens so many different ways. A man or woman go through a difficult time to learn a new skill, can be enticed by the euphoria from the satisfaction of accomplishment that one gets from the experience. The same can be said for someone who works hard to attain some leadership role. The rush of power can envelope them. Power and quick success go to people's heads. We find this story like this in Jephthah's foolish vow. As he was going into battle, he made a foolish promise to God without any forethought. He vowed that if God gave him victory, he would offer whatever came out of his door when he came home as a sacrifice to God. God did give him a mighty victory, and he captured many cities in the process. But when he returned home, it was his daughter who came out from the house to meet him. He was very upset with the consequences of his vow, but his daughter told him that since he had made a vow to God, he had to keep it. In spite of his great foolishness, God still considered Jephthah a hero to his people, and he was listed among other heroes, even in places like Hebrews. Nevertheless, it grieved him for what he did, making foolish proclamations. Why did Jephthah make such a silly mistake? Well, when we look at his life, we see that comes from a rather unconventional background. Although his father had been a man of some reputation, his mother was a prostitute. This questionable background leads him to be driven out by his own kinsmen and family. But that doesn't break him. He basically becomes an outlaw and develops a reputation as a fighter by making his living raiding the nearby Ammonite villages. It was not a nice hand Jephthah was dealt, but he accepted it. And it is also noteworthy to see that he and David had both gone down a similar path, a similar circle, being outcasts of their nation. But when Jephthah's people were threatened militarily by the Ammonites, they appealed to him to be their commander, and he agrees with the promise that he will become their leader when the campaign is over. The deal is made. He goes to war, which he seems to have not had a great difficulty with. He went to war with confidence. He fully expected to return after the victory as a new leader because he had already had military experience with the Ammonites and knew what he faced because of the time that he had been an outcast. He already knew their military weaknesses. In this circumstance, we see him rise to power and reclaim a power that he felt was rightfully his to begin with. The rush of power, the euphoria that he felt of finally being recognized for who he was and not totally unexpected. He had been looked down by his own people and rejected up until then. Now they came to him in the hour of need and recognized him for his strengths. He let some of that adrenaline go to his head, and in foolish moment of a newfound power, he made his vow. How often we have seen people do similar things. Fate gives them some authority and it goes to their head. Maybe it's wealth as the catalyst. Maybe it's a powerful career. Maybe it's an incredible leap of knowledge. Whatever is the fuel, the rush owns them for a while. And of course, in all these things, we can look in the mirror to see at least some little example in ourselves. But we need to realize that although it's a good example of a bad example, God doesn't condemn him. Probably his own condemnation and sorrow for what he had done was enough for God to see his heart and forgive his humanity. This is another possible scenario of the circle of life, to come out of the depths of greater experience and feel the rush, knowing we have developed a new strength or been given a new exciting challenge, to get sidetracked for a moment in ego before adjusting to the new circumstances David and Jephthah did. There's great arrogance and great power, and you have to recover from that. And in fact, the truth is that some people have never been able to return to a balanced view of themselves once they gain a position of some power and eminence. The bad examples of kings and leaders of countries is littered through history, being just one of the examples. But Jephthah did learn, and he was counted among the great leaders of God, as was David. Now let's explore another circle of David, the famous story of how a king was supposed to be out at work with his army, but was actually loafing at home in his castle. And one day he notices a beautiful woman having a bath on a rooftop patio next door. One thing leads to another, and before we know it, somebody's pregnant. And another circle of life begins. And what to do now? Well, King David decides on his downward spiral to try and hide his foolishness by bringing back the woman's husband from war for a short stay with the fully expected hope that this guy will visit his wife so that any coming child will look like a normal event. But it's not about to happen. This army officer camps outside in honor of the struggle of his fellow military men were facing. So the problem remains unsolved, and south things get worse, a lot worse. David descends to the bottom of this circle of his story, where he has his commanders secretly get rid of the husband in order to get rid of the problem. The husband loses his life. David takes the wife, now widow, to be his own, and things seem to go back to a new normal, but it's short-lived. It's not long before God sends Nathan the prophet to visit David, and Nathan, in his business with the king, tells the king a story of has a story to tell him. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and one poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. He shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said, Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, "You are that man. This is what the Lord says, the God of Israel. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and if it would all this had not been too little, I would have given you more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes?" David now faces what he has done, but when it's all said and done, does David blame someone else? No. He he is a mature, wiser king. He could have stood up and said, "This woman who bathed naked before my eyes led me into sin. She is used by Satan to corrupt me, and because of her, I've brought sin into the others, removed her from the palace, and hang her by the neck at the gates of the city for this horrible foolishness she has brought on our nation and upon me." But that's not what happened. That's not an uncommon response, though. In regard history, you see it littered with examples of men who totally and publicly blame others. But David didn't. When he came out of the bottom of this circle and went into the redemption side, he faced a struggle. It was a consequence of his foolishness. Sometimes coming out of hell of the circle can be slow and painful, but you realize you're still counted among the living. In David's case, he owned his mistakes, he humbled himself, he asked God's forgiveness, and made a life with Bathsheba alone. And God corrected him, but blessed him too, and another circle finished. So, what do we learn from these biblical circle stories? Well, we will learn that that's how life is. We face many circles of correction, learning, and glory. Some bigger, some smaller, all kinds of different examples. So to the nations, different lessons are learned, sometimes over and over again. We see in all nations after the horrendous struggle of World War II, there was a great redemption through the need for rebuilding the economies, and greater industrial age began. The nations healed from the awful effects of war, and people worked hard to obtain homes and cities and grew, and highways were built. But then comes another cycle, maybe a time of reflection where people revisit the evaluation of their life and they say, well, what did I miss? What else is there? Maybe there's a new realization that they're polluting their environment a bit too much and corrections are made. Maybe the realization to focus on working was carried a bit too long. As a country, we realize that we need factories and we need to be mindful of nature too, though. And that doesn't mean that factories are destroyed. It means we are starting a long, it means we starting thinking long term. Maybe clean up some of the bad areas, build some parks, recreation facilities too. People learn to appreciate the planet. And so there's a correction of national values. In our personal life, it may be the recognition of the need for family time. During the very young years of family, the need to establish a home and a career can have the consequences that are the other values get trampled during these times of ambition. It's not unique. People are going to push themselves, maybe be rough in order to accomplish, to win, and to achieve something. But then at some point, usually after arriving at some level of satisfaction, we might wonder, well, what did I miss? What did we leave behind? What got sacrificed on the road of accomplishment? What do we need to go back to and pick up and carry with us? And a kind of a searching for the poetic caring side of life can take place. The greater appreciation for beauty, what means spending time in nature, and things like more family time and appreciation of concerts or exhibitions, maybe picnics and camping trips and personal involvement in sports with friends. It's not that we change our values, it's that we integrate other values into our existence. These changes go towards making us whole and complete. We actually may need to learn and stop to smell roses. So, going back to the beginning of this, what is it that makes us recognize and indulge ourselves in heroes' stories, to revisit them, to watch new ones? It is because our journey circles that we go through in life makes us look to heroes, because in their stories we can be encouraged with greater desire to carry forward ourselves and ours, to face our future challenges. The accomplishments and the stories of overcoming from the scriptural examples encourage us to keep grounded in honorable pursuits, to be centered on godly principles, to live lives tied to faith. We have always learned more and developed more philosophies for living, seeing things from different angles while we go through our struggles and circles. And mythical legends and Hollywood movies can lift our spirits and strengthen our resolve, give us an ongoing boost of hope and vigor, help us towards goals. That's a true and complete foundation of life. So, in conclusion, what we will gain in all of this is something like peace, something even in the midst of turmoil. We'll find the ability to put up with people who are different than us, excuse me, and we will find the ability to put up with parts of ourselves that we have never gotten along with very well. But to get there, we need to learn lessons, and all too often we need to learn them over and over again. We're, sheesh, excuse me here, we're partly strong, brave, smart adventurers, and partly very lost, silly fools who shoot ourselves in the foot doing dumb things. So these circle lessons teach us we are fools, that we stay humble. There's great arrogance and great power, and foolish mistakes and great difficulty in learning something is meant to teach us to laugh at ourselves. It's important to embrace that too, to develop a proper sense of fun and play. So to conclude, we need to be the generosity of the clown and the glory of the conquering hero to complete the human journey we are on. Let's just finish this with an acknowledgement to our God. Father, thank you for this brief moment this morning, on this snow-filled morning, to think about the heroes of our life, but especially be mindful, Father, of a great hero that was the original one of our Lord who came to save us. And these mindful things, we remember and think about our past and our future, continue to give us the strength we need to go on and to do it with glory and with the laughter and the humor of the fool. So we give this to you in praise and thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.